How's everybody doing?
Yeah.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
All y'all can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Now that I live in Atlanta, I have my southern lingo down. From y'all and all y'all. Right? Am I correct?
So what's the number ratio between y'all and all y'all? I know it's more when it's all y'all.
I think y'all is just one person and all y'all is a group. Or maybe what's yuns? Hold on, I gotta get that one. Smaller group, yuns.
Let me up that one. Have you heard yuns uns?
No, I haven't.
I've heard of funyuns.
Much better, much better.
I hope I get
Yeah,
a warm
Ewins is
Knoxville
another one
welcome
I've
because
heard.
it's freezing in here. At least it was cold. It was cold outside. Hi.
Hi, guys. Would you like to take questions?
I take tons of questions.
You'll take tons
You
of
can ask
questions.
me AMA. Ask me anything.
All right.
Anytime, any place, anywhere. Doesn't matter.
Up here, Shaggy on the front row.
So nice.
Hey Zach,
Yes.
can you talk about working on Gremlins, working with the puppets, and what that was like, and were there any bloopers, just problems that happened because puppets weren't working from time to time?
Well, it wasn't so much whether they were bloopers. I mean, because there were breakdowns every day. One of the really interesting things about the effects is that it really was the cutting edge of that particular animatronics technology. I mean, now technology is so advanced, and you have a supercomputer and a telephone and a camera in your pocket and everything. But back in the old days of 1983, you were talking in terms of any kind of computer stuff. I mean, there was no internet. Basically, we had like Pong and video games. We had like Williams Defender and Pac-Man and stuff like that. So it was very difficult for Chris Walas, who was the guy who did the first Gremlins. Obviously, Rick Baker took over for him on the second Gremlins. And I actually never knew why Rick Baker took over for Chris Walas. I assumed it was because Chris Walas wanted to be a director. But what I found out on the 30th anniversary of Gremlins, when we did an article for Empire magazine, which is like a British film magazine, what I found out was that Chris Walas, and I didn't know this for 3 decades, but Chris Walas, after doing Gremlins 1, he had a literal nervous breakdown on the set of Gremlins. They pushed him for what most people don't understand is, yes, it took us about 4 months to shoot the movie Gremlins, but people worked on the movie for a good 2 years before we actually got to shooting. It took a huge amount of planning. So when they hired Chris Walas, who was 28 when we did the movie, they hired him 2 years earlier. He was a 26-year-old guy, which is a relatively young man. And when he got the job for Gremlins, he had no studio, no people working for him, no building, no nothing. He was basically like a guy with some skills. And he was a young man, so he had to hire a crew, get a building, start an LLC, he had to do all of this stuff, and then start working on this guy and bring it to Spielberg, as a 26, 27-year-old young man, right? He would bring him prototypes and early versions. First Gizmo version of Gizmo was all white. He had no colored fur. He was just like a white kind of like little baby abominable snowman type thing. And I'm going to get super tangential and then hopefully swoop back and finish your question. But they tried to come up with good, because this is a really fun piece of trivia, especially if you're a dog lover. There were a lot of, they tried all sorts of different color schemes for Gizmo to see which one would work. And they kept bringing it to Spielberg. They'd bring him a black one, and they didn't like that one, and they would bring him a striped one, and he didn't like that one, and they probably brought Spielberg something like, according to them, like 8 or 9 different color schemes. And Spielberg kept going, no, 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 no. So finally someone said, what kind of dog does Spielberg have? And he had a King Charles Cavalier Spaniel. Now, if you know what that dog looks like, this is the exact coloring. So they decided to give Gizmo kind of a King Charles Cavalier Spaniel coloring, and they brought it back to Spielberg, and Spielberg was like, "It's perfect." I don't know if he subconsciously knew at the time that he was responding to what his dog looked like, but anyway, he approved the Spielberg dog version of Gizmo, and that's how Gizmo got his coloring. So Wayless was being subjected to all kinds of stuff like that, and in addition, people would say things like, I wonder if we could get Gizmo to do X. I wonder if we could get Gizmo to do Y. Maybe we could wouldn't it be great if the Gremlins could skateboard? Wouldn't it be awesome if this Gremlins could, break dance? What if we do a Flashdance parody and we have the Gremlins doing, Mega Madness, like or Michael Cimbello? That's why we got Michael Cimbello to do the Gremlins song on the soundtrack, because he did the Flashdance soundtracks deliberately to spoof it. So every time that someone would come up with an idea, it would be an exponential amount of extra work added to what Chris Wayless and his relatively small team of like 30 or 40 people had to do. So after about 2 years of this, eventually people were like, imagine having a desk and every day someone brought in a huge amount of paperwork, and then you would do it over the next week and you would go, I'm finally done, and then someone would bring another mound of paperwork. And you would have, so that was the equivalent. He kept getting mountain after mountain after mountain after mountain of work. And eventually one day he really just kind of snapped. He just couldn't take the pressure because they kept asking him to do things that weren't really possible, and he'd have sleepless nights, and he'd have to go in with prototypes. And it was 2 years of this for a young man, and he just had enough of it. So when they did Gremlins 2, they asked Chris, they were, it had been 6-year gap, so they're like, oh, he's probably over it. And they went to Chris Wayless and said, you want to do Gremlins 2? And he was like, I will never. He started having PTSD, seriously, according to him. He started like trembling, going, I can't think. Like started having like freaking out about it because he had so much stress. It was like combat, basically, to him. It was like so terrible. So that's why they went to Rick Baker, and Rick Baker called Chris Wayless up and said, are you sure you want to step away from this? Because I just want to hear it from your mouth that you don't have a problem. He's like, dude, go with God, man, because there is no way I'm ever doing another Gremlins movie again, because it was just so long and so arduous and just way too taxing on him. So Rick Baker was like, cool, and that's why Rick Baker ended up doing Gremlins 2. But to finish up on your question, on a typical day, Gizmo would break, probably once a day, once every other day, something like that. Sometimes it was a short problem, Other times, there's the time when we were doing the famous Christmas present scene, where they give it to me, and my dog's freaking out and he's licking his ear and sniffing in it, and the dog thought that Gizmo was a real thing. And on one of the takes, the dog stepped on Gizmo's ear and ripped the ear off of his head. And and when it wasn't just a matter of like gluing the ear. It had all sorts of cables and springs and sprockets and God knows what. And so Chris Wayless would come over and he'd be like, oh yeah, oh God, yeah, it's pretty bad. And Joe Dante would be like, just tell me how long it's going to be, Wayless. And he's like, it's pretty bad. Just give me hours, Wayless. Tell me how long. He's like, I don't know, 6, maybe 7 hours. So here I am, me and the rest of the actors, we're in the middle of the scene, and now we have, 6 hours off, and it's noon, So of course I'm 19, I don't care, and Spielberg's office is just down the street and around the corner, outside the studio, so I would just go over to his office. He was away doing Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom most of the time. And he had those big stand-up video games, arcade games. Like in the early 80s, he had Centipede, or no, it was Millipede. Millipede, Pole Position, Food Fight, and Asteroids. And so I would just go in there and I would play video games all the time. And of course, eventually, they would have to come and get me, have to wrangle me. So they
6
got
hours
so
just
tired.
flew.
they got so tired of coming to Spielberg's office and wrangling me that eventually they moved, and Corey Feldman. When Corey Feldman eventually got on, he'd be next to me playing, and I'd be kicking his ass at Food Fight every day, driving him crazy, picking on a poor 11-year-old kid like Corey. But I was 19, so I was just like, whatever. And eventually they got so tired of wrangling Corey and I that they took all of the video games out of Spielberg's office, just put them on the set. So the set would be there and the video games would be over there. So it just made a lot of sense. And then eventually they just moved him back. And when we were done with the movie, as a way of, I guess, saying thank you, Spielberg, without telling me, shipped the millipede machine to my house unannounced. Wow. So I got a ding dong, and I was living in Manhattan at the time. That's where I'm from. And in this apartment building, there was like this freight elevator, ding dong, back freight elevator, which you never got. You're like, someone's at the freight elevator? What's going on? And there was the millipede machine with a little card attached to it, saying thanks for your hard work. Love, Steven. And I was like, what? Of course, this was before eBay, and you're talking 1983. So I had it from 1983 to about 1991, and then the picture tube burnt out, and I just sent it to the junkyard. So, millipede machine there. Well, there wasn't anything to do with it. They're like, we can replace the tube, but it'll be like $3,000. And we're like, yeah, I don't know if we'd like millipede that much to pay $3,091. Now, of course, I wish I'd paid it, retrofitted it, put it on eBay, and sold it for $15K or whatever. But I wasn't Nostradamus, and I didn't realize that the internet was going to be what it was, and I didn't realize there was going to be eBay, and I just didn't figure those things out, and so I just kind of junked it. Of course, I was living in California at the time, so it was really my mom who junked it, so it's her. She gets all the blame. Thanks, Mom. So that's, there was a lot of, there was a lot of experimentation and a lot of, trial and error about getting the effects to work. And pretty much what you see on screen is what I saw. It was all right in front of me. Nothing was ever drawn or sketched or CGI'd in front of me because computer graphics didn't exist. So what you see is what you get. Yes,
the ET panel said the same thing last year. They had to wrangle them away from the video games all the time to do their acting.
Oh, Henry Thomas and
Yeah.
and Drew and Robert McNaughton.
Yeah, they said they were always in there. They have to go find them. So, but my question to you is, in both of the Gremlins that you did, which one did you enjoy or did you like better? Was there, or did you like working with a different cast better or what?
There ain't nothing like the first time. For me, the first time was such a mind-blowing experience. It's weird because I don't know what's been going on lately in my life. I don't think there's anything that's really sparked it because I've pretty much dealt with gremlins practically every day of my life. But I think now that I live in Atlanta and I'm a little bit more financially relaxed than I was when I was living in New York and I was just getting crushed by living in a huge, expensive city, I think I've had a lot more time to sort of decompress and actually reflect on my past instead of just like trying to live for the present day. And so I've been kind of reliving a little bit of that summer of 1983 in ways that I really hadn't in a long time. And it was just a kind of a mind-blowing experience, really. I'm 19 years old, from New York City, didn't know how to drive. You live in New York City, you can't have a car, really. It's prohibitively expensive. And public transportation, at least then, was quite good. And then suddenly you're being flown to Los Angeles, which I'd never been west of the Mississippi. By myself, 19 years old, you're on the plane, you're flying in, you see the Hollywood sign, you go, oh snap, like I am going to Hollywood to do the lead in a Spielberg movie, opposite Phoebe Cates, who's like the hottest female on the planet at the time. You're like, is this happening to me? I had major, what I call, a lot of people call imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is when you start thinking, there has to have been a mistake here. Like, I can't, this really, like, someone's gonna come along and take this away from me because there's no way that I deserve this. And what have I done to, it's like winning the lottery. I'm sure lottery winners probably feel like someone's going to come along and take the money away. It was all some kind of mistake. So there I am. I'm in California, and I'm going to Warner Brothers Studios, every day. And you got to remember, it's early '80s. So I'm running into, I'm seeing people like in the commissary, which is kind of like the cafeteria, studio cafeteria. I'm, online waiting for my, cheeseburger ahead of Bob Fosse. You're like, is this really happening? It's like, it's crazy. You just see people walking around the, this set and around the lot and whatnot. And, Joe Dante goes, oh, we just spoke to George Lucas. He wants to know if you want to go see the new Star Wars movie. You want to go see Return of the Jedi? I'm like, when? Like, they're like, tomorrow night. I'm like, it's not out for another 3 weeks. He's like, well, it's a screening there. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go see. So I took my friend, my high school buddy, Andrew, who was, just luckily for him, happened to be visiting me at the time. We saw Return of the Jedi, in the theater about 3 weeks before everyone else. And that, and George Lucas put me on the list. That's insane. It just doesn't compute, It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to you when you're 19. You're just like, well, I guess this is happening and that's happening and this, blah, 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 blah. And it's all happening to you so fast. It's like life is living you and you're not really living the life. Very overwhelming. And then, of course, people don't think of things like this, like just going out to lunch with Phoebe, and she's like this big star, and I'm a complete unknown, And we would go and we, sit down in a booth in a McDonald's. Actually went to McDonald's, we're 19. Go to the McDonald's on Westwood Boulevard, and we're just sitting in a regular old McDonald's booth, and a guy comes up and goes, hey man, you look just like that chick in Fast Times. She's like, I was in that movie. The guy's like, what? Oh my God, the guy starts trembling and shaking and having this violent physical reaction, and I'm like, what do you suppose he thought about Phoebe? And she's like, I don't even want to know. So yeah, that famous swimming pool scene really put her on the map with just about anybody in the United States who was a dude, and probably some women too. And yeah, it was crazy. Guys would come up and would recognize Phoebe. Sometimes they would talk to me first, and then they'd recognize Phoebe, and they would start shaking. They would just start shaking. That's how much she was sort of like a pop culture kind of sex symbol. And she was ridiculously beautiful looking young woman. I mean, it was just, she was crazy. It was like flukish. That's one of the really strange things about being an actor, is that you meet people, both male and female, who just, their physical beauty that these people have is like, just seems bizarre. You just never realize people could be this attractive, and you're just like, I can't even take my eyes off this person. I'm in the room with them, and it's like nothing else in the room exists except staring at this person because they're so amazing looking. And that's why they have a lot of times that's why they have successful careers, because they just are magnetic looking and magnetic acting. They just have that thing. Some people just have that's why there's a word for it, charisma. They just, I'm not saying I have it, but they do. And they have that thing where you're just like, that person walked in the room and now there's nobody else in the room, and I just got to stare at that person, and how do I get to know that person, and how did I get that person to be friends with me? You know what I mean? It's like, it's a crazy thing. And so Phoebe had that without even trying. That was what was so weird about it. She was and is a very kind of laid back, very modest person, doesn't really understand it, doesn't understand why people react to her in that way. And I mean, she gets it, she's not stupid, but she understands it intellectually, she doesn't understand it on an emotional level. And so people just be like, you're amazing, you're awesome. And she's like, wow, thanks. That's so how is this all happening to me kind of quality. So it was a pretty mind-blowing experience. I mean, it really was, it just took my old life and just blew it up. Like the movie theater in the film, just blew that thing up and completely changed the entire trajectory of my life forever. And yeah, I mean, it's just, you don't really stop and think about it until after the trajectory is kind of like, you know, you're coming in for a landing a little bit, I suppose. But it was a heady experience. So that's why the second one can't even compare to that, because it was just kind of like more of the same, and I thought it was like too comic, and at times I would say to them, like, what, you guys making a Muppet movie, or what are you doing here, you know? And it's like, Joe Dante was like, oh, this one's gonna be a comedy. First, we already did the first one. We need to do the first one again. Why do I want to make the same movie twice? Let's do the second one. Let's do something completely different. And I was like, okay. So he did something completely different and decimated the franchise for all intents and purposes. Now it's 30 years later, and they're finally doing something, finally doing Gremlins Secrets of the Mogwai, the animated series for Warner Streaming. Good 18 months away from that coming out. And then after they've seeded, S-E-E-D-E-D, seeded the new generation with Gremlins mythology and Gizmo merchandise, and they feel that the younger generation, under 20 generation, is sufficiently gremlin savvy, they will probably then do the inevitable live action movie. Which they were incredibly close to doing almost about a year and a half ago. They had a Gremlins 3 written, they had Chris Columbus attached to it, they had locations in mind, this and that, and then it all just kind of vanished. And my guess is, and this is just an educated guess, is that at the same time they were planning on doing a new live action Gremlins, they were also doing some very intelligent market research. And my guess is they got results back going, everyone over 30 thinks it's a great idea, and everyone under 20, everyone under 30 has no idea really what Gremlins is, sort of, or what a Gizmo is, or the threshold, excitement threshold is not high enough. So they looked at a $200 million movie and saw it only working with certain demographics, and they crunched the numbers and thought it was going to be a money loser. So they were like, we could pull the trigger, but we're just going to get killed. So they're like, what do we do now? And the thing is, you educate the younger generation, get them into Gizmo, get Gremlins back in their minds, make it hot and hip and fun and cool and what again. And once you've done that, and they kind of did that with Batman too, and the Dark Knight cartoons and that kind of stuff. Once you get the younger generation hip and savvy to it and going, oh, that's cool, and primed for a Gremlins 3, then they can justify the financial expense of $200 million, you know, to bring this guy back to life. Because he's been complaining for 25 years now that he wants to work, and he doesn't understand why he can't do more. And I said, you've got to be patient. You just have to be patient, it'll come. So he comes with me to shows, and we say hi to everybody, and he's getting excited. Getting excited for your animated series? Yeah? Yeah, he's getting excited for the animated series. So I'm not in that I'm aware of. It's a prequel. But you're going to steal the show like you always do, won't you? Yeah.
I've actually got two questions. One you kind of touched on, but if they're going to reboot or do a third movie and they come to you, would you be willing to be in it?
They better come to me. Smack them upside the head, otherwise.
And the
My franchise, too.
The second question, what is your favorite movie? Like watching wise, not anything that you've been in, but what is your favorite
Gremlins.
movie?
No, I'm kidding. My favorite movie, like ever made?
Yes.
Oh, that's an impossible question. That's like asking you like what your favorite song is or something like that. I mean, I can throw out a bunch of movies that I like. You know what's so funny? It's like jokes. People, 1,000 jokes. People say, "Tell me one." You're like, I can't think of one. Movies. Let's see. Well, of course, I grew up in the 70s, and so the 70s were a very formative time for me in terms of, I think always the movies that hit you the hardest are the movies you see when you're like 8, 9, 10, 11, 8 through 15 or 16. That's when your brain is kind of developing and figuring things out, and you're just, as an audience member, you're like a giant open book, and so you're just so open, you have no boundaries or defenses, so the movies just come in and just smack you across the face and blow your mind. So I mean, like, I will never forget going to see Star Wars when it opened, the day it opened on 86th Street and 3rd Avenue. That was just a mind-blowing experience. I never thought that, like, movies could be that big. Something about it seemed so large. I remember I saw the trailer for Jaws, and it frightened me so much I ran out of the theater. I was 11. And actually didn't get to see Jaws until about 2 or 3 years later. I was just like, I can't do it, can't do it, can't do it. People would be like, I saw it, I can't go in the ocean again. I'm like, well, then I'm not watching it if I can't go in the ocean anymore. Why would I want to do that? Let's see, Network. When you're 12 years old and you see a deeply cerebral, amazing movie about TV like Network, that movie kind of blew my mind. My mom was kind of crazy. She took me to The Godfather when I was 8. And I'll never forget this. There was the famous scene with the horse's head. Spoiler, a horse dies in Godfather. A famous scene with the horse's head, and John Marley's like looking through his bed and finds the bloodstains like that. And my mom had read the book, and she goes, I'm sitting next to her, and I'm just a little kid, my feet don't even touch the ground at the theater. And she goes, darling, look down at the floor of the theater. And I go, why? She goes, just look down. So I look down and I hear, oh my God, John Marley screaming because he finds the horse's head like that. And I'm like, ooh, that sounds bad. I'm looking down, looking down, looking down, looking down. He stops screaming. And then she goes, you can look up now. And I looked up again and I watched the rest of the movie. Didn't understand it, really. Kind of understood it. Didn't really get it. I think she just really wanted to see it. And she was a single mom, so she was going to take me to see The Godfather. Planet of the Apes.
Yes, yes.
I saw that in the theater. That's how old I am. I was 5. I was like, they killed New York! Yeah, I love that. And Beneath the Planet of the Apes, I saw that too. I love that movie. That movie is amazing. Yeah, Planet of the Apes is one of the earliest movies that blew my mind. That ending is it's still a great ending, but yeah, that movie was crazy. That movie still is crazy. God, Charlton Heston was great in that movie. It's a madhouse, a madhouse. Yeah, it's a great movie. That movie stayed with me for 50 years. Isn't that enough? That's probably enough. Also, I had a huge, probably the first woman I ever realized was the most stunning, incredible thing that I just could never stop thinking about her was Raquel Welch. I saw a movie she did about roller derby called Kansas City Bomber. And I just was like, if I ever wondered if I was straight or gay, I think I'm straight because I can't think about anything else except Raquel Welch in a roller derby outfit. So yeah, and also people didn't know there was an incredible movie with Burt Reynolds called Deliverance, which is not a movie an 8-year-old should see, but this was the early 70s, and I saw it when I was 8. And yeah, that had quite the impact on me too. That made me a big Burt Reynolds fan too. And actually, I'd never met him until last year here at Pigeon Forge at Bubba Fest when he did his last convention. And yeah, it was him as what I call the Southern Holy Trinity. It was Richard Petty, Burt Reynolds, and Lee Majors at Bubba Fest. It was awesome. It was just so great being in the same room with Burt, and he had his Corvette, was it Camaro? Trans Am, sorry. His Smokey and the Bandit Trans Am was awesome. And Richard Petty's there too, and that was awesome. Richard Petty I'm like, were you better or was David Pearson better? And Richard Petty was like, David Pearson, Silver Fox, the best it ever was. And I was like, you don't believe that. You're the best race car driver ever. You're the best ever was. Love Richard Petty. It's so weird that a New Yorker growing up in Manhattan would love Richard Petty, but I loved Richard Petty. Guy was badass. Still is. Still is. So there you go. That's enough of the movie. Enough of those movies. Exorcist 2. I saw that on cable about 2 or 3 years after it came out. And I was like, is my brain okay now after seeing all these movies at such a young age? But that was the 70s, just no parental supervision whatsoever. Just didn't exist. You're like, where were the parents? Where were the parents? What were they doing? Where were they? Does anyone know? Well, if you find my mom, tell me. I still don't know where she is. But 70s were a real, I was a latchkey kid, I came home from school, my mom was working. My dad divorced my mom, was living down in Washington, D.C. We started a second family. So basically, I came home, and that's one of the reasons probably why I was an actor, is I had to kind of entertain myself, because my older sister didn't want to have anything to do with me. She was off with her friends and her boyfriend and whatnot. So I was basically kind of, after school, left to my own devices. Just in my room talking to myself and being characters and playing accents and learning voices and listening to Monty Python records and memorizing them and learning how to do all sorts of different accents, with this upper class accent, or then to do this accent with the guys like cooking, super working class or whatnot, So I just spent hours and hours, kind of like Jim Carrey, except not quite as crazy as Jim Carrey. Just practicing fun stuff, not knowing that it would ever, come in handy. Wow, I haven't thought about some of this in a long time. It's pretty cool. You guys, I hope you're not going to charge me like a therapy bill or something.
This one's on the house, next one.
Sweet. So wait, that was one question. Did you ask both questions? I can't remember. Yeah. Okay.
If you'd be willing to.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, and I was like, they better.
I think we've got one more question we could do right here.
So I love the Gremlins, but I wanted to know, because I've read so much about actors that have gone out for parts and they didn't end up getting them.
Uh-huh.
Do you have a part that got away that
Oh,
you
my
really
gosh.
wanted and never got?
Yeah, you know what's so funny? I find a lot of actors hate talking about the things they didn't get, as if it's like somehow their fault or a failing on their part. I mean, if y'all only knew how much luck and weird randomness goes into getting a part. Like I knew this one director, and this didn't have anything to do with me, but he saw this young woman, and actually at the time, I was helping the person do like a little casting, so every now and then I would come in and do readings with people, and just read with actors just to help out casting directors. I don't think I've ever mentioned this, but fun fact, when they were doing Jerry Maguire, there was the time when Cruise was out of town doing something. So Cameron Crowe and Gail Levin, who's a casting director at Disney, they asked me to come in and see if I would read with some people just as Jerry Maguire, and I was like, do you want me to read it the way that Tom is reading it? They're like, no, you can just do your own interpretation of it if you want to. It's fine. We want you to read with some of the actors. So I went in and I read with this young, unknown actor named Owen Wilson for the part of Bert Sugar that went to Jay Moore, I think, in the movie. And then with Kelly Preston, who did eventually get the part in Jerry Maguire as Jerry's first wife. And what was the question again?
Was there a part that got away?
Oh, part that got away. And so I was doing this casting thing, and the woman came in and she gave a phenomenal audition. And the producer loved her, and everyone in the room loved her, and then the director's sitting there going like this, yeah, I don't think so. And everyone's like, what? What are you, crazy? She's phenomenal. Why didn't you? Yeah, I don't know. Something. So he said no to her. And what I found out later was that the actress reminded him of his daughter, who he was estranged from. And the last thing he wanted to do was sit in the editing room and look at an actress who reminded him of his estranged daughter for 8 months. So because she happened to look like the director's daughter, even though she was perfect and totally deserved the part, didn't get it. So there's so many bizarre, random things, because people are human and they're not computers and machines, or at least not yet. And so, there's all sorts of emotional things that go into casting decisions and whatnot. And sometimes you'll hear about someone who's like, the producer wants you and the director wants somebody else, and they argue about it, and then they split the difference and they go, well, you don't get your choice and he doesn't get his choice, so we'll settle on this person, and they pick person number 3 and that person gets the part. So, you know, anytime I feel bad about my career, I stop and look at my IMDb and realize that I've gotten over 70 parts, and that's in and of itself is kind of like a miracle that you get that many roles, you know? So it's pretty crazy. But as far as like the big 4 or 5 movies that, it's weird, there's a bunch of movies I tried out for that I didn't get. For some reason, I'm kind of like, you know, I don't know, I didn't get it. I didn't really feel like I was that right for it. And then there are other movies where I felt like I deserved that movie. Like that movie was made for me, and I should have done it, and it should have gone to me, and I came so close, and I should have done it, and I didn't get it. So in the first category of movies where I was kind of like, you know, I wasn't that right for it, you know, like Back to the Future, I read for that. If you look at that movie, I'm not really that right for the Marty McFly. If you see what they eventually went with, not really like, I didn't get that close to it either, really. So, you know, and Breakfast Club I read for, I didn't really get that close to that one too. Now, St. Elmo's Fire, I screen tested for with Ali Sheedy, and we had like 10-minute make-out scene, and it was like everything, and I should have gotten that movie. And in fact, the director Joel Schumacher was like, "See you on the set" when I left. So I flew back to New York like, yeah, baby, got this, and then like total triumph. And they were like, Judd Nelson, and I was like, what? Okay. And they're like, well, he plays older than you, and they all know him, and they all like him, and they don't really know you, and so it didn't work. And I was like, okay then. But probably the one that stings the most that I finally brought myself to watch it about 5 years ago. 25 years later, I could not remember, was Platoon, the Charlie Sheen role. I met with Oliver Stone for 2.5 hours. It's my longest audition by far. I read 40 pages of the script with him for an hour, and then for 90 minutes, we sat down and he drilled me on what drugs I'd taken and what my political views were, and this, that, and the other thing, blah-de-blah-de-blah-de. And when it was over, I thought, if I don't get this movie, I don't really know what else I could possibly have done not to get it. And again, sort of to back up what I was talking about, how many different factors play into whether or not you get a role or not. Oliver Stone had made a deal with the producer. The deal was this: he would write a movie called Year of the Dragon that Michael Cimino would direct with Mickey Rourke. And in exchange for writing Year of the Dragon, he would get to direct Platoon, which was his second movie that he ever directed. And so I did that audition, and it went great. And then Dino De Laurentiis and Oliver Stone got in this huge legal battle that lasted about 11 months because Stone had written the script, but then the producer was like reneging on doing the movie. So he was like, hey man, I wrote the script for you, now let me direct the movie. And Dino De Laurentiis was like, you're not going to do the movie for me, it's too expensive, Vietnam is bad, you know? So they shut down the whole movie like that for about a year, and when the time they picked it back up, Oliver Stone had completely done different things, which changed things with his thinking. You know, he had a year to think about it, and he's like, I want it to be sort of like a post-apocalypse now type of a thing, and so I want Emilio Estevez to do it because it's Martin Sheen's son, and then Emilio Estevez was doing a movie called Wisdom with Demi Moore that was directorial debut, so he said no, so he's like, okay, I'm gonna do Charlie Sheen, who'd basically done nothing. But he was Martin Sheen's son, and then you had the Apocalypse Now to Platoon kind of tie-in, which is weird because nobody really thinks about that when they see Platoon because they're such different movies. So I lost that one out, and that one was just brutal. And then probably the other one, you know, it's when you screen test. And what I mean by screen test is you go to Warner Brothers or Universal, and you go and you put on the costume. and you get the costume fitted for you, and you go on the set, and they built a set for you, and they have a camera crew and lighting and the director there, and they're shooting it just like a movie. They're going to do the wide master shot, and they'll come in for a 2-shot, and then do your single and that person's single and whatnot, da-da-da, and then they cut it together, and they see how you look in a film with it cut together. I went out for a movie called The Rocketeer. So I have a picture of me in the Rocketeer suit holding the helmet, you know? And if there was ever a woman, Jennifer Connelly. I mean, I did an audition with Jennifer Connelly in 1988, and it's burnt into my cerebral cortex in a way that I cannot shake. Of course, I was 23, because it was 1987. Yeah, 1987. I was 23, and she must have been about 3 or 4 years younger than me, so maybe she was 18, 19. This young woman was the most astonishing creature I had ever seen in my life in the flesh. I don't know what I did at the audition. I didn't get it. It was for this movie called Promised Land with her and Kiefer Sutherland. I was just probably, I mean, my audition was probably like this. Like just a moron. I could not function. She was just, it was ridiculous. She had these piercing green eyes. She was just insane. It was freakish. It was absolutely, it was like, I don't know what it was. It's 30 years later, I'm still trying to process it. And so I came this close to The Rocketeer and didn't get it.
I love that movie.
And it's a fun movie. Alan Arkin is great, and just everything about that movie I thought was really cool and badass and great. I would have loved to have been The Rocketeer. Now, of course, the movie was kind of not really a success. In fact, that's the type of movie they should remake now.
With you.
With me, no, I'm way too old for that. But yeah, that whole Rocketeer, Jennifer Connelly thing, that was just savage and unnatural on my psyche. So I took that one really hard. But most of the other ones I really don't. You know, I've now been in the business, my God, this March is gonna be 39 years. So to have 2 or 3 brutal experiences, that's one a decade. That's pretty par for the course, really. Trying to think if there are any other really, really brutal ones that got away. Don't think so. Would have been nice to have gotten the first Melrose Place just for the money. Not that the series was that amazing, but I tested for the first Melrose Place, and I thought for sure I was going to get that because Aaron Spelling was a big fan of mine. I was a big fan of his, and I did a lot of stuff for Mr. Spelling. I thought he was a great guy. Really loved that man. He was super cool and super nice to me. So, yeah, you win some, you lose some. You can't really sit around and think about what you didn't get too much. In fact, this is probably the most I've thought about it in quite a while, so thanks for that. I'm kidding. But you have to sit back and worry and think about the stuff that you did do, because that's what really kind of in the end defines you, not what you didn't do.
Well, cool. Do you have anything that you'd like to maybe leave us with? Any kind of parting words or brilliant sage advice or anything?
Parting words. I mean, I don't know. You'd have to narrow the topic down.
Any life advice?
Any what?
Life advice? Career advice?
Life advice?
Yeah. You know, nothing too big.
Probably. Whenever I say something like that, I'd always want it to be kind of intelligent and well thought out, and I'm not sure I really thought it out. I mean, I guess what you have to realize is that life is difficult. It's a lot more difficult than people told me it was going to be when I was young. You get a lot of mixed messages when you're young, your parents tend to tell you, don't be selfish, don't be selfish. Can't be selfish. And then as you get older, like, you get in your 20s and you start losing out all these things and stuff like that. And you're like, why is this happening to me? And people look at you and you go, hey man, you gotta be selfish. You're like, you just told me for 20 years I shouldn't be selfish. Now you're telling me I gotta be selfish? Make up your mind, dude. So, life is a real deep learning experience. And hopefully you don't punish yourself for the mistakes you made, and you're kind to yourself and good to yourself about the things that you did correctly. That's kind of my secret to happiness.
I
My
like
secret
it.
to
You guys like
happiness.
it? Yeah, I like that. Thank you, everybody. Give it up for Mr. Billy. Thank you, and also Gizmo.
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. That went by really fast. Come to my table and see me if you haven't already. Come to my table. Say hi.